Hi everyone, and welcome to our video on Apache Polaris. We're going to tell you everything you need to know about this project, how it's come into being, what it's trying to solve, and a lot about why it's an Apache project. To start with, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Russell Spitzer. I'm one of the software engineers at Snowflake. I work mainly on open source software, including the Apache Iceberg project and the Apache Polaris project, and I am a PMC member of both of those. And I'm joined here today with Michael, who would like to introduce himself.
Yeah, I'm Michael Collado. I'm also an engineer at Snowflake. I work in the data lake, specifically on Iceberg and in the Polaris on the Polaris project. What we want to cover today is a little bit about the Apache Iceberg catalog, just kind of recap what the catalog does and why the REST catalog in particular is important. And then we'd like to dive into the architecture of Polaris, and then Russ will come back and talk about the Apache side of things. All right, so I don't want to spend a lot of time here. I think most of us are familiar by now with how Iceberg manages the metadata for a table. So the job of the Iceberg catalog is to store the current metadata pointer for an Iceberg table. That is, what is the current state of the table. And most importantly, it has to support atomic operations to update that state. So amongst multiple simultaneous transactions, it has to be able to atomically update the table state and make sure that everybody agrees on what the current version of the table is. And secondarily, it also supports list operations, so listing namespaces in tables, so you can kind of navigate and see what are the tables and views that exist inside of your catalog. Just a handful of the catalogs that exist currently in the Iceberg SDK. We have the Hadoop catalog, which stores the version pointer in the version hint.txt file in cloud storage. That's the one that everybody tells you you're not supposed to use in production, but everybody uses it in production. And then there's the JDBC catalog, which stores the version pointer in the relational database, Postgres or MySQL or whatever. There's a Hive implementation that uses the Hive metastore, and there's also a Snowflake implementation, which just wraps the JDBC driver, calls a system function that finds the current version of the metadata JSON file for your Snowflake Iceberg table. So here's a simple diagram of what your Iceberg application might look like. You have an Iceberg client, for example, the Spark Iceberg library, which will talk to a catalog implementation, which will be one of these different implementations that exists in the open source project. That catalog will reach out to its backing store, whether that's HDFS or Snowflake or DynamoDB or whatever. And then it'll find the current version of the metadata JSON file, read it, get the table metadata, return that back to your Iceberg application. And then your Iceberg application can use that to find all of the manifests and data files for your table. So what's wrong with that? What's wrong with the existing catalogs? Well, there's a lot of them, right? I just listed like 8 of them in the previous slide, and that's not a comprehensive list. I have a link here to the community sync from back in February where they spent a lot of time talking about this, but the community spends a lot of time focusing on bringing feature parity across different catalog implementations. Right, and naturally that kind of means slower iteration for bug fixes and new features to the Iceberg core. Now, as a data consumer, you are tied to a data provider's specific catalog implementation, right? So if you have a dependency that has their catalog in Glue, you have to know exactly what Glue catalog they're using, or if they're using the Hadoop catalog and sticking it in storage, you have to know the path to the warehouse in the storage. So the purpose of the REST catalog is really to solve these problems, right? So now rather than the community focusing on managing a bunch of different catalogs, the community can support a single specification. And that kind of means the community can focus instead on integration support instead of feature parity across the different implementations. That kind of naturally leads to faster iteration for bug fixes and new features. And then as a data consumer, you are tied to your dependency's service endpoint rather than having to know what their specific catalog implementation is. So now a new application diagram might show your Iceberg client, right? The Spark Iceberg library talking to a REST client. Now that REST client reaches out to a service that lives somewhere else, and that could be your team's metadata, it could be your dependency team's metadata, and then your that external service reaches out to its own backing store, whether that's Snowflake or something else, and then we'll read the table metadata and return that back to your Iceberg client. But then your Iceberg client doesn't really need to know anything about your team's metadata or your dependencies backing store in order to get that metadata. So Polaris is intended to be an implementation of the REST specification. Why did we start that? Well, you can't really deprecate the old catalogs until we have something to migrate to. And the Iceberg open source includes the REST specification, but it doesn't include a reference implementation. So we really wanted to provide a reference implementation that was ready for production, ready to use on day one. We added additional functionality like support for multiple catalogs, external catalogs, authorization support, and we wanted it to be enterprise ready from the start. We added authentication, multi-tenancy, secure credential handling, and we'll talk a little bit about each of those. As an implementation of the REST spec, we define all of the entities that are defined in the specification, such as catalogs. Catalogs are at the top level. We can have multiple catalogs, as I mentioned earlier, and these catalogs can be either internal or external. An internal catalog just means that Polaris itself is the authority on the state of the tables that are defined in that catalog. So they are read-write, so you can read from a table and you can write to it and update its state, and that state will be updated in Polaris and reflected for all readers. An external catalog just means that somebody else is the authority on the current table state, right? So for example, you might have a glue catalog or a Hive catalog, and in order to update the state of a table, you have to update it there in the authoritative source, but then you can read from that catalog in Polaris. Catalogs also hold storage configuration, so the catalog knows where in S3 or GCS your table metadata lives. And then roles and privileges are also scoped to a catalog. Beneath catalogs, we have namespaces, which can be nested. We don't put any limits on how deeply you nest your namespaces. Most people just use one or maybe two levels of namespaces. And then within namespaces, you have your tables and views. For permissions, we added three different entities. We have principals, principal roles, and catalog roles. So a principal represents a user or an application, right? So for example, Michael is a user, or maybe my clickstream processing application or my ML training job. Those could all be different principals, and they each have their own set of credentials for accessing data in the catalog. Principal roles are kind of a grouping of principals. So you could think of a role as sort of the hat that you wear in your job, right? So you come in as an engineer. As an engineer, you are granted certain privileges. But as a member of the data lake team, I also have certain privileges, and also I'm a member of the product organization, which means that I might have an additional set of privileges. Now, catalog roles, you could think of those as more groupings of privileges. So you could think of like privilege sets or privilege bags. Those would include things like read access to specific tables, write access to specific tables, or create access for tables in a given namespace, something along those lines. Privileges are applied to the entities within a catalog. So you can apply privileges to a catalog itself, in which case the privilege applies to all entities inside of that catalog. Or you can apply a privilege to a namespace, in which case it applies to all child namespaces as well as the tables and views within them. Or you can apply privileges to specific tables and views. So privileges cascade from the top down. There's not a deny statement. So if you grant privileges on a catalog, for example, if you say you have table read privileges on this catalog, you have read privileges on every table in that catalog without exception. Here's kind of a visual diagram of what the permissions model looks like. So you can see principals and principal roles at the top. Those are global. All right, so you define a principal once within the Polaris service. And then you grant those, or you assign those principals to one or more principal roles. Then within a catalog, we have the catalog roles, and you can define one or more catalog roles, and a principal role can be granted access to one or more catalog roles, and principal roles can be granted access to roles in different catalogs. The catalog role themselves is assigned permissions to different entities within the catalog, so namespaces or tables. This is a more concrete example. We see here at the top, Michael is a principal, and Michael belongs to the principal roles, data admin and data engineer. So as a member of these different roles, I have access now to two different catalogs, the Clickstream catalog and our ads catalog, where I am either a catalog admin, which means I have read-write data basically on everything, or in the ads catalog, I have list tables privileges only. And then we have our application diagram again. Here, the Iceberg client now is talking to the REST client again. But that REST client is talking to an instance of Polaris. And inside of Polaris, we'll have two different catalogs. That might be my team's metadata as well as my dependency team's metadata. And then within the catalog, we're going to do an authorization check. So if I make a call to get table metadata, it's going to check that based on my active principal role, which tables do I have access to, and do I have read access to the table I'm trying to get metadata for. And assuming I have access to that table, it'll go ahead and fetch the metadata for the table and return it to me so I can go ahead and access the manifests and data from storage. All right, and with that, I'll hand it back to Russ, who will talk about the Apache side of things.
So we've been talking a lot about what Apache Polaris is and how it works within the broader Iceberg ecosystem, but we didn't talk too much about what the Apache part of that Apache Polaris really means. And it really comes down to open source. And that leads us to really an important question, which is, what is open source? So what does open source actually mean? So it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I kind of want to talk about it in the different scales of how open a project can be. We can start with just the very basic, which is it's open code. So that means a company might own it, but they let you see everything that's happening behind the scenes. This is really great at some levels because you can look and you can find bugs. You can know exactly how the implementation works. If you're developing things that integrate with that system, it makes it a lot easier to figure out if what you're doing is going to be a smooth integration or whether you're trusting things that might change in the future. But that's the most restrictive way you can have open source. We can also have open contributions. So within a system where anyone can then offer a patch to the project, you basically have more involvement with the community. Community can find bugs, community can submit bug reports and pull requests, and basically actually actively work on the project itself. And this leads to a project where a lot of more people feel ownership and the project is a little bit stronger from a community perspective. But in my mind, that's still just about halfway there. What I really think open source software should mean is complete open governance. So this means not only is the code open, not only can anyone contribute a patch, but the future of the project is also driven by how the community decides, which means there is no one group backing the project. I find projects that adopt open governance are really, really strong and stand the test of time. And that's what I want to kind of go into in a little more detail, which is what do we actually care about in a project that we want to adopt? So in a project, we really want to make sure that if we're trusting this for our production usage, for our production data, we want to make sure that first it is an extremely transparent project. We want to make sure that if any decisions get made, if any code goes into the project, there are eyes on it. Nothing kind of comes out of nowhere and everyone knows why code is the way it is. So we need to commit to open communications. We want to commit to having everyone have eyes on every part of the development process. And we want to make sure that anyone who is in the project, we know why they got into that project. So we're able to trace the work that someone has done on a project before they get the authority to actually make decisions within that project. We're also another really important aspect of a project is its independence. We want to make sure that all of that transparency makes it clear that the different people who are making decisions within this project are doing that as a community. They're doing it through consensus. This isn't just one group going ahead and saying, well, this is going to be the next feature of this project, and everyone just has to deal with that or else. We want it to be a situation where everyone is working together and saying, this is a really important feature. Or, for example, I want to make this open source even though some other company is currently making money off of that particular extension point. We want to make sure that everyone is able to work together to make sure that the project works to the best for the best of all users and not just one group of people who are working on it. And I think with that also comes the idea that we want to have an organization keep us to those rules. We want to make sure that we belong to a project where if people violate those rules, there are steps that can actually be taken. We want to make sure that the governance itself has oversight from another group. And last but not least is we want to make sure that our project has a strong community that respects the community over the contributions of any one person. And the reasons behind this are really simple. Not only do we want to be good people and work with other good people, we want to make sure that our community is long-lived. Our project that we're relying on production, we want to make sure that there are people working on that project, years and years to come. If all of the contributions come from one person who's not nice, well, if they ever decide to work on some other project, that's the end of the project. So these are all really important things in a project. And when we were thinking about what we should do with Polaris, this drove us to a really simple conclusion, which is we should donate this project to the Apache Software Foundation. What I've just described to you are actually taken verbatim out of the Apache way, which is a description for how Apache Software Foundation governs its projects. It makes sure that all of its projects follow those key elements to make sure that they are long-lived, they are supported by the community, and they remain independent from any vendor influence. So knowing that those are all the things that are in the Apache Software Foundation, Snowflake made the move to donate to the Apache Software Foundation the Polaris project. But this is a journey. We aren't there quite yet, unless you're watching this video far in the future. We are currently an Apache incubator. So the Apache Incubator is a project that basically incubates new Apache projects and makes sure that they're actually following the rules and governance set forth by the entire Apache organization. So we've already gone through several steps. We wrote an extensive proposal that described what exactly we were going to do with the Polaris project. We made sure the project got accepted, and we had mentors assigned to it. And currently, we are in the stage where the Apache Polaris project is an incubating project and is doing its best to follow the Apache way in the hope of becoming a top-level project in the future. So this is all really exciting from an open source perspective, but I'm sure a lot of folks are interested in the kind of things that we're going to be working on technically coming up soon. So again, as I was just saying, we're only one of the many members of the Apache Polaris community, even at this stage, which means all the things I'm going to share are just what we think are important for the project, but are not guaranteed to actually be a part of the project. These things are discussed with the rest of the community, and we decide whether or not they should go ahead and how they should actually take shape once we implement them. But that aside, I'd really like to go through some of the things I'm most excited about coming up for the Polaris project. One of the things that we hear about most is fine-grained access controls. We have a lot of users who enjoy those security controls or are required to have them for their particular use cases. And we want to make sure that Polaris has full support for those kind of fine-grained access control use cases. The catalog is the right place to hold these kind of policies because it already has all the information about your users and other things like that, and it can decide whether or not to grant access to the underlying files to any particular engine. So we're going to have this implemented in a way that trusted engines are able to access specific tables only if they will apply fine-grained access controls. This is a bit of a collaborative project that we'll be doing with the Apache Iceberg group, but hopefully will be coming soon. Next up, we're going to also be looking at federation. As Michael talked about, we already have support for external catalogs, but we realize that we have a lot of room there. There's a lot of different kinds of data sources that we could be communicating with, including all of those previous Iceberg catalog implementations. So one of the things that we're really excited about is working on integrating older Iceberg catalog implementations into Polaris as federated catalogs so that there's a smooth translation between your data on one of those old implementations and then your data within Polaris. One of the other things that we then see a lot of folks are requesting is a way to hook in their table maintenance into the catalog itself. A lot of Iceberg users right now are focused on writing their own services or their own code to do table maintenance, and they basically exist independently. We think that the catalog is a great place to start defining what table maintenance APIs should actually look like so that you can hook your Apache Polaris instance up to any number of vendors' different table maintenance services and have table maintenance be done automatically for you. So we're working on that as well. And of course, we are also really interested with the Iceberg spec and how it's developing. So whenever new REST APIs are added to the Iceberg REST spec, we are going to be working on incorporating them as soon as possible. So recently, we've just had added new APIs for scan, and folks are working on new APIs for commit. We want to make sure that whenever you're using an Apache REST, Iceberg REST client, you'll have access to all of the most up-to-date APIs within the Polaris project. So we're committing to working on those as soon as we can. And last but not least, we're really excited about making Polaris more than just an Iceberg catalog. We want to make sure that Apache Polaris can support just about anything you want to put in a catalog. It should be your one-stop shop for any kind of table, file, ML model, or table format. So to that point, we're really interested in expanding Apache Polaris to handling all sorts of non-Iceberg things as well as Iceberg things. So this is a lot of work, and these are the things that we're really prioritizing and are interested in, but we can't do it without you. So this is my call out to everyone watching. Apache Polaris, as an incubator right now, but hopefully Apache Polaris top-level project in the future, is looking for more contributors. Anyone who's interested in using this project, developing this project, or working with us, I urge you to come and reach out and tell us about your ideas, join the community, and we have a lot of different resources for that. So we have a whole lot of different places that you should start your journey on Apache Polaris. Good place to start is, of course, our docs. We also have, of course, all of the code available, github.com, Apache Polaris, and we have live chat. So there is an official Apache Polaris chat at zulibchat.com, and we also have a chat going on within the Apache Iceberg Slack, and there's a hashtag Polaris channel. But of course, all of that is just part of the thing. If you're a true Apache project, you'll know the saying that if it didn't happen on the mailing list, it didn't happen. We also, of course, have the Apache Polaris mailing list, which I have the link for in the bottom corner. So please feel free to reach out to us if any of those future things that we're interested in working on, you're interested in working on, or if you have your own ideas or other development directions for the project. We'd be glad to hear it and glad to have you involved. So thanks everyone for listening to me and Michael talk today. You've heard all about the Apache Iceberg REST spec, how we've implemented how we've developed an implementation for the Apache Iceberg REST spec with Apache Polaris, how that project now has a whole bunch of features that you can use right now in production if you like, and of course, that you have the opportunity to become a part of the Apache Polaris project. We're just at the beginning now, developing what will hopefully be something that the entire community can work on, and we're excited to have you become a part of it. So thanks so much again for tuning in, and we hope to see you on the mailing list.